Well, hello everybody. I'm really pleased to be here this evening with Kevin Greer, the artist. Hello, Kevin.
Hi, Sandy.
Hi. We were just talking before we started about the title tonight, The Edge of Colour. You know why I chose that title, I think. Do you want to explain it?
I'm assuming you took The Edge of Everything, the title to one of my shows a few
Hmm.
years back, and combined it with the fact that I am a colorist. At least that's what I was told by my college painting professor, which I had to look that up and kind of understand that better. So, yeah, it seems like a perfect mashup of an old show and sort of the theme of my work, which is color as character or as content or emotional content.
So even though the show this references is now quite an old show,
Yeah,
I'm wondering if you still have the same or think you still have the same visual language.
100%, 100%. I think I think where people let's think of like a coloring book where you have the outline and then it's your job to decide where the colors go. I think the way I have always looked at everything is in color and mood and how blue feels to you might be different than others, but how red, could feel violent or romantic or both or neither. I like those transfers of, you know, where one where one energy emotionally charged with your own life experience and what you ascribe to a color, how it blends with another. For me, I've had a long journey to find where do I want to put the outline of the actual subject versus where do I want to put the color inside the little cell.
So I'm interested in you thinking about or talking to us about coloring books almost like when you're little and you have a coloring book. And I'm wondering
Yeah,
if you can remember being this child,
yeah, yeah.
and if you remember anything particularly from these times where you would have worked with color or what you would have done with color. I mean, when did you first become aware that you really are an artist?
Well, I think everybody, I mean, this has been said before, but every child is artistic, and we sort of, whatever that Picasso quote is about, like growing out of the child creativity or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, I had a, I had a or a cookie canister that was um, probably my mother's or something, and all of my crayons were inside of that. And so my memories as a kid of this age uh, would just be like opening that round cookie canister and like fishing through which colors I wanted and building little worlds in front of me. And I think maybe it's was twofold. It was my way of expressing and playing, and also maybe therapy to like have control of some little world or something that you got to build.
You have mentioned in adulthood, I've read somewhere that you think of your work as being almost like it is a play. You need to play with
Oh yeah.
color, but you also need to be playful, I suppose, to view what you do. Would you say that's right?
Yes. As far as a way of finding the work, entering the work,
Yeah, I think that there's maybe
I've
a
yeah,
kind of
I've set things up differently as I've moved away from the abstraction. Not to say the work I'm making now doesn't have elements of abstract, because I'm in no way doing hyperrealism, photorealism. I don't want to. I would love to have the skill set to be able to do something that is so believable that it could be a photograph, but I wouldn't want to leave it in that state. I would want to unravel it somewhere and give the mind a little or the eye a little like serotonin hit where it's like, oh, well, that's clearly a painting and not a photograph. Like he's flexing. He's showing us that he can do that. But in my mind, that wouldn't be as interesting if I left it so hyper realistic that people were like, is it a painting? Is it a photograph? Early on in my career, it was all about play, and it
Mm.
still is. But I have more of a setup now where I used to just go in with an empty thought, empty canvas, and whatever I made that day a lot of times was influenced by what colors I had in front of me. Versus now, I do a lot of building on my phone first, and I take pictures of things, and I use little apps on my phone where I kind of cut sections up and piece them on top of each other. And there's a piece behind me that I had put the blue and white vase in. Well, that's because I had, kind of worked it out on my phone first to see what would that look like before I do that.
Mm.
And so there's more planning happening now, but the play and playfulness is always going to be at the forefront of my work because I feel like the happy accidents, you don't know what you don't know. And
Mm.
sometimes you stumble into something where you go, wow, okay, I thought I was going to try and execute this one thing as good as I can to my ability. But along the way, something spilled and it created something that, visually or psychologically now is more interesting. And I want to leave, the door open for those little things. I don't know if your viewers will be able to see this, but I have the word play. Is that one? Nope, that's Maggie. I have the word play right here tattooed. So it's it's definitely I think all of life is play, you
Mm.
know?
I mean,
We're lucky to
your
have the
process as a
opportunity.
painter might be the process itself seems maybe playful. You have a lot of photographs that we can look at if anybody has seen your Instagram, for example. You often appear with your paintings, kind of like you're in a
Mhm.
relationship with them, I think. Um,
Yes.
but there does seem to be, these kinds of photographs, the process of actually making the physical act of painting has that changed much over time? I know you're saying you plan a lot on your phone now, but the actual process of applying something to a surface, is that different now to what it would have been, let's say, 10, 15, 20 years ago?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. So when I have an idea now, and this has only come into play in like the last maybe 3, 4 years, even, um, it's sort of like having the recipe to the cake. You know what steps have to happen first.
Mm.
And so some of those steps involve like I have a projector right here. Um, I may know that I need to add the atmospheric background color first, let that dry, which won't take long because usually I'm working in acrylic. And then after that, I can start projecting some of these ideas onto the canvas, you know. And a lot of times they kind of, you go, all right, I'm going to start with this one idea, but now I have a new idea that I want to put on top of that and another thing on top of that. And my criticism with what I'm doing there at this point is the new ideas come after the fact where I've already laid down an idea that texture is kind of there ingrained.
Mm.
And what I'd like to do is build the painting entirely before I start it. And then that way I know. So like again with the piece behind me, that vase, I've got to work it to where it feels like its own like volumetric shape
Mm.
that like has curvature and has its own, you know, textural feel.
Mm.
And right now I'm still picking up some of the flower texture that I had behind it. You know what I mean?
So I'm gonna come to the painting that you've got behind you will appear in its own space in a minute, but I'm looking at these paintings, obviously in front of which stand beautiful beautiful women who buy your paintings. I'm looking at paintings in these shots where it seems like there's a layering process, and where for you as an artist selling work, that's always been a very successful tactic. People really love that element of your work. Um, I'm wondering about the positive feedback that you will have had about your paintings when they have sold. I mean, these photographs are from a show, aren't they, where you did really well actually before you even opened. People had come in and bought lots of your work. Um, Tell me about reception to your work, your perception of the reception of your work.
Mm, the perception of my reception. This was an interesting show. This was at Gallery Soco on South Congress, which is where I kind of cut my teeth as far as like building an audience in Austin. There was a man named Jason Siegel and his wife Francesca who ran it, and they were very good at what they did. Their location was fantastic. I remember my first solo show here, and my grandmother, who's passed on now, she actually took me to my first show, and I remember being very nervous. I always wanted the work to sort of speak for itself and me not have to interact. You know, some people want the stage and some people want the limelight. And I kind of was like, I've done my work. I came up with a title as best I could. Because a lot of times when you're making abstract work, there's a certain type of clientele that they want to know what they're looking at. It helps them enter the piece. And my problem with, to go off on a tangent, is that sometimes when you pin something down so specific in a title, you direct people into a direction that maybe you don't mean to, or just the idea that you sort of close the window on what their own ideas could be.
Mm.
So I always loved coming up with very um, ambiguous or abstract titles myself. Um, but yeah, as far as the reception goes, this was a funny one because I did have a lot of I had well, I had three or four ex-girlfriends, and I've usually stayed friendly with everybody that I've been with and shared time with. And I remember watching them as I'm taking this picture here with the actresses. They were all kind of huddled together in their own little group, kind of watching me and sort of not being snarky, but sort of smiling or whatnot, you know. But this was lovely because Samantha Mathis, the one in the cowboy hat, cowgirl hat, she had bought those three pieces prior to the show opening. And then another actress who's not in these photos, her and her husband, her name's Carla Gugino, and her husband wrote Snakes on a Plane, so I guess he's, you know, writer of sorts, director or whatever. They bought a piece for their New York apartment, and that allowed me to also have another red dot out
Mm.
um, the night before my show, so that was great. But this was a good turnout. It was a great
Do you
location.
think that celebrity brings success?
I think celebrity brings attention.
Mm.
I think attention brings, you know, whatever's warranted. You know, I think if you do something bad and a lot of people know about it, then a lot of people know about it. It's just a vehicle. You know, I mean, I don't. I was talking to a friend of mine today, gearing up for this, and you know, he was excited for my opportunity to gain new followers or whatever. And I said, you know, I've chased after the algorithm and the hashtags and tried to, you know, knowing that the work has some merit and that's for the public to decide, but knowing the success that I have had and how to market that or how to package that or how to present that in the right light to the right people, that's its own full-time job. And I don't want to do that job. And I know that that's, unless you have connections or some kind of art agent or whatever, it's a necessary side of the coin. But after chasing fame and notoriety in my work and trying to, you know, just crack the code on the perfect painting that the world will have to stand up and take notice and all that, the pressure that you put on yourself. I'm really just happy to kind of do what I do, and if the world sees it, they see it, you know? There's so much energy going out to the actual um like posturing, and I feel like with play like Instagram and Reels and how you can sort of cut up your process in a very delicious little video for somebody to watch, and they go, "Oh wow, this is how he does that," and he built a whole painting in 30 seconds because of time lapse or whatever. It just it's something that probably comes natural to younger people that want to play with that technology or want to paint a painting with a GoPro strapped to their forehead or whatever. I don't want to do that anymore. I just want to quietly push out my work, and if people think it's interesting, great.
I find it
If
interesting actually that you use the word quiet because
mm,
you have said before that there is a kind of quietness in your work where it's strange for me as an audience. I your work is often big, it's large scale, it's vibrantly colorful.
mhm.
It's where does quiet come?
Well, I think for me, it's a quiet space. So, and there's a piece that you'll show that has these pinks and these blues. We spoke on it earlier.
Mm.
That's kind of a series. Like for this one,
I'm
for
just
things
thinking
like this, they're
now.
very color fields that you can kind of like climb into. This one has speed. This one has, maybe less speed, but that same calligraphy. This is just going on walks with my dog. That's the one I'm referring to. These things feel like quiet, Rothko esque in their like, you immediately kind of are inside the painting. And so whatever you're bringing with you that day is maybe the mind space that you're in. Um, but I feel like they're these very soft sort of um, bleeds of colors, where one color kind of will invade the territory of another one and sort of melt into each other. And I did a lot of work like that for a long time. This is the type of painting that I could make 3 or 4 of them a day.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm a lot of times I'm just mixing right on the canvas. I'm just putting 4 or 5 colors, straight on the canvas, and then getting a wide 4-inch brush and doing these sort of blends and bleeds, and then throwing a little weight, to decide where the bottom is, and maybe something interesting at the top, which would be that sort of red, little scrape or scar or line or however you want to interpret it.
Mm.
And that's sort of for me, that's the you are here on the map. That is the actor on the stage of this piece. And I can push those types of things out all day long because that's what I naturally do. But at a
I
certain point, I was
I
trying to kind of advance beyond that.
I noticed that actually of all the paintings that I had picked out, this
Mm,
is the one that when we spoke earlier, you really wanted me to include. And
yep.
actually now with this painting, seeing it on the screen, which always of course is a kind of paltry approximation, isn't it? Looking at something on a
Yeah.
screen as opposed to looking at
Yeah.
it in the flesh. It really does feel like an envelopment. You know, you could sort of disappear into the color. And I've, I'm thinking there's quite a lot kind of going on now for me, thinking about you and your work. I'm
Mm,
looking at somebody who has had success, is working in a way that people have enjoyed and have wanted to buy. They've wanted it hanging in their homes. I'm working or looking at somebody who's working in an abstract way in a landscape format, even though obviously it's square actual format. But I'm just coming to this thing that you've actually said yourself about an intimate exchange of territorial moods. And
mm.
that is absolutely summed up in this painting.
Yes.
Whereas in other work that we can look at of yours, there might be more of a kind of um it's like a collapse of space rather than an expansion of space. There's a slight difference, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and graphic in nature. And I had a whole, sort of calligraphy, cursive. It was almost for me. It was sort of like the rhythm of like an EKG machine.
Mm.
You're not supposed to read anything there. There actually aren't any words in that one specifically. I did do a bunch of word paintings, and even those, even though I knew I was writing things, it wasn't for the viewer to understand it. It was more for just like, here's brainwaves, or here's musical notes, or just here's a roller coaster of lines. Kind of took me back to when I was a kid and we were learning cursive for the first time, and I loved that class more than probably any other class, almost as much as art,
Mm.
because when you would start like a Y and how you would like loop down and then like swoosh, and I felt like I was riding the rhythm of those those curls and those loops. And for me today, still, I don't really write in print unless I'm forced to. Everything for me is like cursive, and there's such an art to that. I mean, there's so many painters that have made a career off of just like their penmanship and calligraphy almost. So
It's a really beautiful way of, again, layering. If we were going to build a word bank that goes with Kevin Greer for particularly this interview, it would be layering, it would be um, softness. It would, for me, be landscape. I do still get landscape. Even from this, I get landscape. Uh, I think probably because you do tend to have, especially in, I think, your earlier work, an emphasis on like a horizontal
yes.
level. And at times that reminds me, even if it's not explicit, of horizon. There's
Hmm.
something quite, I guess, deep philosophical about that we can reach towards the horizon that we can never land on or arrive at. There's something about receding with this one, for example. Actually, it's odd to think of it as a painting that I would go to and be able to touch the surface of, because it really does
Oh.
have a depth of space. Um, but do you think that in this depth of space, things are sort of encoded, or rather, how are things encoded in this depth of space for you? Like, what secrets are in your painting?
I don't think I've ever even looked at this painting that long. And it's sort of funny because like with fresh eyes, so many years later, I mean, I probably made this piece like 12, 15 years ago.
Mm,
And I'm seeing a foreground, middle ground, and a background, and kind of that white line cloud in front of the background. And I feel like there would be such an opportunity to literally pin somebody in at least two of those places, the foreground and the middle ground.
mm.
And then I would have been able to like push the depth even more. I never even really thought of this piece as having much depth. It was more like,
It does. To me, it
let
makes me
me,
feel like I'm
it,
walking
it
into
does to
a
me
fog.
too now looking at it with fresh eyes. And I think that there was an opportunity there to really make this strange landscape more believable and have even more distance, where this is just very flat for me and it's not about distance. Now, this piece is all about this sort of buffalo shape for me. It's like where the black kind of the top of the head and the bottom of the underbelly and the neck or whatnot. I always just got like a bull, I guess, buffalo bull kind of vibe, and then with the red, it kind of reminded me of like the guys that do the red thing, the cape and the bullfighting, what the toreadors or whatever they're
Matador.
called. Yeah, yeah. I don't know.
Um,
This is a long time ago, so it's hard to even really know what I was striving for. This is the oldest piece that you'll have in the collection here.
Do you think that your paintings, though, are sort of fixed in time? So we're talking now, today, it's 2026, and these paintings, or some of them at least, will be from 10, 15 years ago. Um, Over time, does your appreciation of them change? Like, does the meaning change for you? You know, some artists I speak to are very keen to fix a meaning, to kind of
Uh,
preserve it through the painting or through the photograph, particularly. But have you done that, or does the meaning move with you?
I guess since none of the work is of like a personal nature to me, it's not something that has like a fixed, like this was when that, and this will always be when that thing happened or that feeling or that chapter. So in looking at some of this older work, I'm looking at it as what is its potential? What would I maybe have done different? I'm still editing, and I'm not saying that like this piece, particularly the last one. Now that I'm seeing that there was some depth in that last one, I'm thinking of ways that that could have been pushed. But yeah, it's it's sort of like you just play because that's for me. Painting is, and I think this is a Rauschenberg quote, but it's like making a painting is the best way I know how to relate to life. It's something that I need to do, but it doesn't always have like this encoded like message or carry this like big story behind it. And so,
Does it trouble you that
yeah.
other people will look at this and will see an encoded message, though?
Oh no, I want them to see what I mean. Once I've done whatever I've done in creating something, it's out of my hands. It's up to every individual person to decide if it even grabs their attention at all in the first place. Nobody's looking at my work wrong, okay? And
Mm-hmm.
it's not important to me that, you know, let's say I made something, I'm like, oh, no, you perceived that all wrong. That wasn't my intention at all. No, my work is colors and movement and now getting into more nature and flowers and such like however you see it is fine with me.
Mm. So this is one of the paintings that you have actually got a title with, Embers. And
Yep.
is it that we look at it, we see embers, we think of fire, stuff's burning. There it is, it's orange. Is that it?
Yeah, I think that was that was probably good enough for me. So this piece was part of a show that I did, and it was actually the orientation was vertical, and it had a partner with it. It's 4 feet by 8 feet, so it's rather large.
Mm.
And when they stood next to each other, the circular shape that looks like maybe the sun sort of engulfed in embers and flames and fires or whatever, that trajectory in orientation went into sort of a moon phase that was the second piece that it stood next to. It was very like two twin towers and this sort of moon phase going in a trajectory of like an arcing trajectory. So they were meant to be sold as a pair, and they had a kind of almost a day and night vibe. But then once I separated them and realized that this piece worked really good on its side, it had less of a moon phase sun arc and more of a almost like Turner, the artist Turner.
Hmm.
I don't know, it was just I liked the color. I liked the dissolves in it and the stuff in the front where it has these sort of little pops of pebbles or circles. Those kind of reminded me of like the pops of a campfire when the
Yeah.
wood sort of just bursts.
So you said send me some stuff about the artists that have really informed your practice, and
Oh,
you gave me a
yeah.
variety of names. You know, you said that when you were young, you started out like lots of us would do when we were at art college or before art college, looking at people like Dali and Escher. And then you gave names, really quite diverse names, but from the wide canon of Western art history, Monet and uh, I've been thinking about what I see when I see your work, and I wonder if you do see references to other artists in your painting as you're making it, or is it retrospective?
I would say that the stuff like the pink and blue one that we talked about earlier, where you sort of feel enveloped,
Mm,
that's very much part of that Rothko era of my life.
yeah.
Yeah, and this painting is actually in coming up with titles, which sometimes I enjoy and sometimes it feels like a chore. Um, I titled this one "Between You and I Lies a Lullaby Beneath an Afternoon," which I just thought that's pretty. And this for me is very Rothko. You know, there's something where you look at it and all of a sudden it's sort of wrapped around you. You're inside the box. Um,
So how
but
important
yeah, some of
is
the other
that anchor
work I would
point?
say, yeah.
You talked before about there being this smudge at the top is like almost like an anchor point or something similar to that, that you needed an orientation within the space.
Yeah.
Why do you want to do that to us in this otherwise softscape?
I this wasn't an afterthought where it was like, okay, I've made the stage, now let me put the anchoring up at the top. It was one of those things where I think I had blended out the colors. In looking at it, you've got these pinks and these sort of creams below that line. That was just an area that still had the original like unsmoothed out paint, and I think I left it almost like as like a maybe it'll feel like a cloud or a scar or I don't know something. And then when I got done with it, I didn't mind it being there. So it really wasn't supposed to like I'm not I don't know if it draws the eye up there and keeps it there the whole time for me per se, but it didn't bother me that it stood out as a hard line or aggressive area in an otherwise soft. And maybe I think in leaving it, I liked the fact that there was sort of a little contradiction somewhere in there, maybe,
Mm.
or a little dichotomy, you know?
Mm. So when you make things like this, do you feel like it's a departure from painting, not just because it's a drawing, but because something else is happening? It's representational, for example. It's not colorful.
Yeah, big time. Yeah. And I mean, I would say that it's possible that I go back to some of this and figure out ways to blend it with the abstract and color fields. And I think that's kind of where I'm at right now. Obviously, this is drawing and this is charcoal, but even in what I'm doing right now, I'm sort of blending. And this is obviously a real moment, worked from a real photograph that I took, and I think the idea of blending those two worlds, where I have the Rothko world that you can climb into, it's atmospheric with its colors, but I'm inserting some like real content, real places, real objects into that world. And I think that's really what I'm moving towards.
But why are you doing that?
Well, because I think that after doing abstracts for 25 years or so, I kind of, and I mean abstracts in the sense of like they're just colors blending into other colors for the most part and some energetic brush strokes and textures. I kind of ran down that road and got to the end of it for me. And I wanted to have like a subject that I could explore, whatever that subject is. If it's a chandelier, it's a chandelier. But now I get to like look at it from all different angles and figure out how I want to present it and I get to, it's like you can't abstract from nothing. You have to have some reference point of jumping off. But to the flip side of that, if I'm just going to represent, say, this chandelier, and make it as perfect as possible and as believable as possible, well, I might as well just take a picture and save everybody some time. So the idea of having the energetic energy and emotional coloring and atmospheric stuff with the real contextualized object or objective to get across, blend those together, I feel like is a more interesting pairing than a painting about nothing or a shape about, you know, just whatever it is,
But
you
does
know?
that mean that you are actually approaching meaning?
Yeah, yeah. And that's where people like Monet are starting to enter my interest, and just the impressionistic of things. You know, in nature, there's just not a lot of hard lines, and so I'm not doing that work yet, but I am starting to see how the little the little peppering of colors when you're up close makes sense when you get further back.
I'm just wondering if you, having been to art college, I think you went, did you go to Kansas City Art College? So
Yep.
you've been through a kind of artistic training. Do you feel that that corrupted you, or do you think that enhanced your practice?
Well, it didn't corrupt me. I did have an instructor there, who at one point said, "What are you doing here? Like, why don't you just get out and start making your own work?" And he said that in like I mean, he meant that in a very loving way.
Mm.
Um, I think that school is there to teach you how to think. And then once you have those skills, and disciplines, then it's on you to go figure it out. My instructors in painting, uh, so going into the foundations program, the freshman program at KCAI in Missouri, I wanted to get into the dean of the painting department's class, Warren Rosser. And to do that, you have to be like an upper grad or whatever. And so I invited him into the foundations department and I said, "Will you just look at what I'm doing and consider me for as one of your students for next year?" And he brought me in. And so I got to study painting under him. And one of the things he used to say is like, "This isn't a picture making class. We're not making pictures in here." And so I think that stuck with me for so long that, even if you represent something in a pictorial way, there's ways to draw like a painter and there's ways to paint like an illustrator. It doesn't necessarily just have to do with the material you're using. And so for the longest time, I didn't want to depict anything. And I don't know if that's because I had his voice in my head or whatever, but as I've slowly gotten into, wanting to paint something, somebody says, "Oh, those are flowers," I've found my old way of doing things sort of mashed in with my new way of doing things. This is a perfect example of me using photo layers, the app on my phone, and taking an image of like real flowers and real vases and putting another landscape of green leaves with the white flowers on top of that, and then on top of both of those putting a very wallpaper kind of print on top of all of it. And then you can go in with the tool and you can erase a layer, which then allows you to see the layer that was underneath it. And I liked that as an image in my phone, and I thought that would be interesting if I painted that. And so this was a very planned out piece before it got painted. And I
Mm.
pretty much executed it exactly. I mean, with it's not as realistic as the photographs were, but it's close. And so I'm sort of another thing that I find interesting about this piece though, or one thing that I find interesting about it is that you have flowers in the wild, you have then flowers in vases, so they've been captured. And then the very last layer is you have flowers as just design.
So again, all of that tells me that there is a kind of concept and
Yeah.
context. So when
But
you were before
this
it,
is like one of the first ones where I'm doing that. Prior to that, it's more just like blending colors. You know, I'm not really rooting anything in anything. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's not a picture. If it gives you a feeling, it's perfectly fine, whatever feeling you're having. And as I moved away from that, I started to want to like depict this is what this activity feels like, or this is what three different snapshots of, say, plants, nature, flowers look like in three different orientations.
Hmm. So your influences, you've given me influences, named them, but one of them is obviously nature. I mean, did
Yeah.
that come from something that is just because you enjoy the abundance of nature around you? Is it something that has rooted through from childhood? You know, did you spend most
No.
of your time as a child outdoors? I don't know, but where did it
Yeah.
come
No.
from?
I mean, obviously, it's our natural surroundings. So, I mean, I don't. There's landscape artists that deal with the landscape as their muse, and I'm moving more into that, but more of like a psychological landscape of sorts.
Yeah.
And, you know, some of it's really fine tuned. I mean, this is the ideas that I'm having in my head where areas of it are executed, you know, as good as my abilities are, and then other areas will be left undone in very like playful, childlike manner. I think what would make an interesting piece for me would be to depict a world that you want to kind of like walk in, and it has areas that really light you, like you get like sort of a dopamine hit where you go, oh, that's yummy, that's really developed over there. But then other areas sort of untangle and almost just sort of go into like a draft, kind of bare bone outline of the idea. And I think those worlds would be fun to play with, because I think it would be fun to look at a painting and see that it's creating itself and maybe unraveling itself at the same time.
I suppose it also gives your audience multiple portals through which to enter this.
Yeah, it gives them something to do, and sort of experience it from maybe like child hands, like what would look like a kid at play
Mm.
versus someone who has a mastery of their tools in their field. And I think combining the two of those would have like elements of loose and elements of tight, and I think that could be really fun to play with.
Yeah, I also feel looking at some of the work you've made sort of in the in-between space between those early days that we looked at and then what we're coming to more recently with particularly flowers is this sense that you are like an artist in transition. And when this painting, for example, you said earlier that you can't paint in a hyper realistic or a photorealistic way. There is something really photographic about this. It's a really bizarre angle to pick. It's got a strange uh, kind of liminal quality to it. I'm just wondering if, when you're walking about and looking at the world, is everything at the edge a kind of smudgy other world for you? When you're actually meeting the world, not through painting, just as you, do you have a kind of loose diffusion around the edges of.
That's
Mm.
beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. So, so the work, this piece specifically, it does have some movement to it, but it also has some like the light source where it's picking up like the leaves in the tree and like, you know, it has something that's rooted in reality, but it also has these fantastical moments
Mm.
or um these blurs, these, diffusion where you're just like, I don't really understand, maybe that's supernatural or maybe that's time lapse, like emotion thing blurred by or something.
Mm.
That's kind of going to the, let's make something fantastical and interesting and um, nonsensical and blend it with something rooted, whatever those two things are. But yeah, my view when I'm looking at things, what I'd really like to what I'd really like to make ultimately moving forward is figure out how to make paintings that feel like core memories. So when you are on a road trip and say, you're going by a field of flowers and the windows are rolled down and you capture it, but it's going by so fast that it's sort of got a blur to it. It's
Mm.
sort of that motion is frozen in time. That memory is, snapshot in an album and captured. I'd like to make some stuff that looks like that. Like I see my abstract work mixed in with using new technologies and tools like photo layers on that piece, mixed in with the last one that had like a light source and it had a real feel of realism mixed in with some, not sure what the supernatural, blur of energy is. And where I feel like I'm wanting to go into is put fantastical moments in very believable settings.
Hmm. You
Yeah.
mentioned Richter as one of your Gerhard Richter as one of your influences. And I suppose when I think of Richter's paintings, I think of somebody who enjoys that smear past of
Mhm.
time somehow. And
Yeah, he did a whole series where, and I wish he had painted the ones first, but he did do some smears on top of photographs,
mm,
and they're really beautiful because they sort of, I don't know, they have a tension between the two of them, but then because obviously they're from different worlds, but then the way he's done them, he's integrating them, and I think what I would have liked more is if he'd created the real world first and then put the fantastical on top, which he totally has the skill set to be able to do. Um, his his career has been very interesting, and I did not know who Gerhard was until somebody who was collecting my work mentioned his name when I had my work at Gallery Soko. They said, "This reminds me this is very Richter-esque," and I said, "Oh, okay." And then they told me who it was, and I looked up some of his work, and I was like, I see some of my earlier stuff where I was using anything but a paintbrush to apply. I was dragging work, I was setting it on fire, I was um, hitting it with water, I was using certain wet paint to mask off areas that were dry underneath. Like this one right here, the way I have some of those, yeah, that one right there, those swoops and things, that was just wet paint
mm,
that was acting as a barrier between the color that was underneath it. And so might make more sense, but you have a color, let's say it's dry, then you put something wet on top of it in a shape. Well, now that area underneath it is sort of being protected while the wet stuff is covering it up. I would hit it with spray paint and that would cover everything except for where the wet paint was. Now, before the wet paint dried, I'd hit it with water and wash it off, and it would reveal what that first layer was. It's almost like taping off,
Yeah, I've
an
just
area
been
that,
looking
yeah.
at work by an artist called Angel Otero, who's a Puerto Rican artist, and he works on
Okay.
plexiglass and then transfers the
Ah,
images in layers.
how do you
And
spell the last name?
Otero, Otero. I mean, the thing that I'm finding so
Oh,
interesting
yeah.
about going through your archive is that at first glance I might have thought, well, this is work by Kevin Greer and it all looks like Kevin Greer. But actually, as I've gone through your work, I've really felt that I've not maybe ever seen an artist who unknowingly, maybe, but it simply has so many different references that could be pulled from other sources in them. And how the arc of your work over all these years, let's even think back to the crayons when you were little, there's something like keeps on sort of yielding. There's a high yield turnover in your work of reference. And where I find it particularly fascinating is that if you are not always going to be aware of what those references are, how they, um, I'm just wondering if that's a kind of moment of genius that, you know, my art teacher used to say to me that art doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Right.
You've gone around and you've collected experience and ideas from all over, and you've blended them, synthesized them into these outcomes. But we could reverse engineer everything to find
Mhm.
the lives of artists from near and far kind of bedded down in them. It's amazing, really.
Well, you have a beautiful way with words. I appreciate everything that you just said. I feel like I am collecting. I'm always sort of picking and going, oh, well, that's interesting. I like that. And as I've gotten older, things are starting to move in different directions. And so, I'm still trying to figure out what my voice is, and ultimately it will change, hopefully, you
Isn't it
know.
funny when you think about what your voice is? Your voice has already moved on by the time you decide. And again, that's the
Oh,
impression I get from your work.
well, wasn't it Miles Davis that said it took him a lifetime to learn how to play like himself?
Mm.
There's just something in, for the longest time, I really wasn't studying my own field as far as like the history of it. Um, and I think I think I wanted to have blinders on and just make work without influence.
Well, this is why I asked you about art college corrupting you.
Yeah, well, I was a bad student, so I don't feel like, if anything, the direction I got was, you know, that art is more about than making pictures. Um, but ultimately, as I've gotten older, I'm starting to crack a book open, and as far as the history of art. So, like, if you don't know the conversation that came before you, then you don't know if you're adding to it, where you're adding to it. Are you, adding? I mean, you're adding something, but it's sort of like there's so much to piggyback off of, and I don't mean like, I mean, you could literally cut up a Dali painting and stick it, areas of it, on top of a Monet, and that would probably be fascinating. And everybody would have a concept of like, I don't know what I'm looking at, but these two worlds seem familiar to me.
Mm.
And I feel like that could be interesting.
Well, there already
That's also
is
taking,
a sense, a powerful sense in your work of something familiar. And I don't mean at
what's
all
that?
I don't mean at all that you've ripped anyone off. That's not what I'm saying.
Right, right, right.
But I love this idea that you've come to a lot of this, like the inceptive moment of your painting is fresh for you. Like you're not trying to uh, manipulate me into thinking that you're the next Gerhard Richter, for example. You're not trying to tell me that your greatest influence is Monet. You're not telling me that. Uh, but all those influences and references do exist in your work. But isn't it amazing that they're actually, in some cases, retroactive and retrospective? So I am an art historian. I can look at your work and I can say, oh, yes, I can see Rauschenberg, or I can see Barnett Newman, or whoever I can see, because I can see all these people in your work. And I think as we come towards the end of our conversation, something that I'm going to take away is that when I look at Kevin Greer's work, I'm looking at, I guess in music, it would be more like something that's symphonic, and not just
Mm,
in an individual thing, but as the collection of your work, your legacy, your archive is something that has, it's like you've got all these artists from, again, the canon of Western art history. They are all there, but it's not oppressive to you. And I find that
mm.
brilliant, really. Most artists are extraordinarily hung up on which mold they fit in. That doesn't seem to be where you are at all.
Well, I think that's well said. I don't know. I feel like I've had this conversation with other artist friends of mine, and it's like you get to a point where you feel like everything's been done. It just hasn't been done by you. And so I'm, I guess whether it's subconsciously or consciously, everything that I'm collecting in the course of a day or viewing, it all kind of gets spilled out. You see a color combination on a sweater and you go, oh, those are interesting. And you're just sort of collecting. And then when I do have my sort of my meditative, studio time, I'm sure a lot of that stuff does come out. But I know in working with sort of the idea of these photo layers of what about this and this, where I'm pre planning something, I have started to think in terms of like, what would it sound like or what would it feel like if these worlds collide?
Mm.
And so I could probably sit there and go, the corner of this painting here where the green is sort of fading into the white, into green, into the dark, that sort of serape kind of like that reminds me of that blue and pink one that was very Rothko, you know. And
Mm.
then the left side of it that has sort of like almost a little impressionist, kind of like little mark makings. And so yeah, I could also pick apart and go, this reminds me of this reminds me of that.
Mm.
Maybe we'll put a little Egyptian here at the bottom, maybe we'll put a little, um, and maybe it is becoming more of a fusion that I'm aware of and thinking of, but it also might just be this is the culmination of everything that I've seen and know, and it's all kind of coming out. It's fun to watch all these worlds and ideas play with each other,
Mm.
like a smattering where you go, I'm just going to make paintings that just reflect art history.
Yeah. I mean, there's
The
actually
topic.
there's a British painter, Flora Yuknovich, who
Okay.
paints like not in a bad derivation, but she works in a kind of ultra contemporary style that borrows from Rococo, particularly flower forms. And
Wow.
she spoke a lot about how personal objects and patterns are kind of the collected aspects of one's interior self. And I've always really liked that idea that, um, we can only make things that are of us, you know. So when you're making this work, as you say, you've got this synthesis happening in
Right.
all the time from experience and the collections that you've gathered over time. What's going to be so brilliant, really, for anyone watching us is to question what you're going to do next, really. And you can suppose about it, but actually, I wonder in your case if you actually don't know yet, because that's maybe not how you really work. But you can't preempt. I mean, it fascinates me
Right.
talking to you about
Right.
the kind of work that you're doing on your phone and like layering in a very intentioned way.
Yeah.
But
Well, the phone stuff that gives me a map. It gives me an idea of what to go off of.
mm,
And so I think when you're finding beauty and interesting things and shapes and textures everywhere and you're recording it and then you piece it together in these sort of collage paintings on
Mm,
my phone, um, there's a lot, like there's an endless amount of inspiration. And as far as, stylization and like, oh, you did this in the style of that, or you did that in the style of that, and you're combining them in this synthesized hybrid fashion or whatnot. I had a professor at art school say that he didn't really mean this, but he said best way to break stylization is to break your hands. He just meant you'd have to find a new way to make a mark. And I think I like the idea of what I think might be next for me is sort of these collage paintings that are interesting, beautiful moments to me that, some feel more developed spaces and undeveloped spaces. I'd like them to all be very rooted in their own textural feel. So if an area is supposed to look a certain way and feel a certain way, then it is treated very intentional that that area feels that way. I don't know, when you're working on a piece and you're sort of finding it and uncovering it, you put ideas on top of ideas, and
mm.
that's kind of what this has become. Had I had this already game planned, mapped out, I would have been able to like hide some of those first layer textures, and it would have felt more like objects and worlds that inhabit their own space more clearly. And I'm just talking about technical right now as far as texture,
Mm.
basically, rambling on about that. But I think ultimately, I would like to make paintings that feel like Cocteau Twins songs.
Sure. Feel like,
Yeah.
please do that.
Yeah. I mean, I know that's sort of, I know that has something to do with, energy and atmosphere and, angelic rhythms or something.
Well,
So
you could make a painting that's like Elizabeth Fraser's voice, couldn't you?
I would love to. I'm ultimately, that's my goal, ultimately.
And I'll
I'm
buy
not
it
there.
from you. You can ship it over
Okay.
here.
All right.
Anyway,
Deal.
Kevin Greer, it's
Deal.
been so interesting speaking to you, and also very generous of you to give us your time. I am excited to see what you do next. I will be very interested to watch and wait and see which particular blend of your experience comes out next time.
Wow. Well, thank you, Sandy, for the opportunity to talk out my thoughts. And I felt like as much as this would be an interview about my work, it would also be kind of therapeutic for me to try and answer honestly your wonderful questions and what I might learn about myself, my process from where I've been to where I'm at and maybe where I want to go. So I'm interested to see what I make after talking to you.
That is a lovely thing to finish on. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Sandy.